They're unoccupied because they used to be lived in by the king or the queen, but they're not now, and in fact none of them have been since the 18th century, so for at least 200 years, and some of them for longer than that. There are all royal palaces though, so they're all owned by present Queen, Queen Elizabeth II. She owns them on behalf of the nation, which means that she or any other monarch can't sell them, can't give them away or do anything with them, because they have to be there for everybody in the country to enjoy. After the king or queen stopped living in the palaces, they became the responsibility of government to look after them. And that was the case up until 1998, when we became an independent charity. The difference really is that rather than the government give us money to look after the palaces, and each year we have to say how much money we think we're going to need, now as a charity we are responsible for generating our own income to run the palaces, which means, of course, that the more we can make, the more we can spend, and we can spend it on things that we want to spend it on. We don't have to predict what we're going to try and spend money on in order to be given a grant. So it was financially in our interest to become a charity so that we can spend the money how we want. But it does mean that we're responsible for making sure we get enough money to keep them going. Because that is our only source of income. We don't receive any money now from the government. We don't receive any money from the royal family. It's all the money that we can make, and that's with admission fees, so people paying to enter. It's with retail, our shops, our cafes, money we get from private parties, functions that are held at the palaces, money that we get from sponsors or donors, or any source of income we can find, we will take, but it means then we can spend the money on what we want. So, which are the 5 unoccupied royal palaces? The first is the Tower of London. It's world famous, I'm sure you've all heard of it. It's a World Heritage Centre. It's also the home of the British Crown Jewels. It's where they live, and that's historic. It's so that the monarch couldn't get at the Crown Jewels and sell them. So they were always kept in a large prison, because it used to be the state prison as well. The proper name of the Tower of London is Her Majesty's Prison and Fortress, the Tower of London. That tells you everything you need to know. It's also, of course, world famous for the beefeaters, the yeoman warders, who are quite a symbol of Britain as well. So second is Hampton Court Palace, and this was King Henry VIII's favourite palace. It's in southwest London, so it's probably the furthest outside London. But again, it was built really as a sort of pleasure palace, really. It's where he went to relax, where he went to entertain, and future kings after him did the same. So it's got 2 sort of different building styles. It's also got a very big garden that's an attraction in its own right in many respects. So third up is the Banqueting House, which a lot of you may not have heard of, and if you've been to London, you've possibly walked past without realising it, because it is opposite, literally on the other side of the road, to Horse Guards Parade, where the soldiers, the light guards, soldiers on horseback are, and they of course are very photographed by tourists. The building opposite is the Banqueting House, this building here, and it is part of a royal palace. Whitehall Palace was the London home of the King and the Queen until the end of the 17th century, when it burnt down, apart from the banqueting house. That's the only bit that's left, which is why it's one of our historic royal palaces. It was a new architectural design when it was built. It was very sort of avant-garde, it was very sort of modern in the 17th century. But all buildings in that area now copied it, which is another reason why you might have walked past it without realising, because they all look the same. They all actually look like this now. It was built as a party house, a banqueting house for eating and having parties in. It's very famous within England and sort of English history because it is where King Charles I was executed in 1649. He's the only king that we ever executed, and it happened there. 1649. So fourth up is Kensington Palace. This became a royal residence in the 17th century because it was just a little bit outside London. It was a little bit further into the countryside than Whitehall Palace had been, and King William III, who became king in 1689, had asthma and he didn't like the city smoke, so he wanted a home that was a little bit outside in the country. And he bought and renovated Kensington Palace. It was then where a lot of court activity took place, and it's actually where Queen Victoria was born. She's a very important monarch in English history, Queen Victoria, and it was her childhood home. It's probably more famous now as being the last home of Diana, Princess of Wales, and you may have seen the worldwide photographs of flowers when she died, being left at the Golden Gates. And is now, in fact, half of the building is open to the public and belongs to, or is looked after by Historic Royal Palaces. The other half is still part of the royal family homes, and it's where Prince William, the Duke of Cambridge, and his wife are now going to be living. So that Kensington's a little bit sort of half and half. It's half historic and half not. But the historic part is the work bit that we look after and that you can visit. And finally, we have Kew Palace, which is in the middle of Kew Gardens. And in fact, Kew Gardens, the Royal Botanic Gardens, which are, again, are world famous and are a World Heritage Site, were the original gardens of the palace. But the palace is very small. The gardens expanded and in fact merged with other local gardens. Kew Palace is more like a house really. It's not palace-like at all, but it was the home of King George III in the late 18th century. It was their family home where he and his wife and children used to go to retreat a little bit, and it was where King George III was taken when he was very ill. And if you've ever seen the film The Madness of King George, the scenes where he is in a straitjacket and bundled off into a house, that happened at Kew Palace. And in fact, they didn't film that film at Kew Palace, but they did take the dimensions and they recreated the interior in a studio. So those are our 5 palaces. We are run by a board of trustees, so they keep an eye on what we're doing. There's 11 trustees and a chairman, so 12 of them in total, and they are chosen for their skills and knowledge. They're all non-executive, which means that they don't have any real controlling power. They're also unpaid, but they oversee what we do. So, if you like, they're almost like an auditor. They keep an eye on what we're doing just to make sure that everything's all right. But the day-to-day running is done by a chief executive who has 8 directors working with him to make sure everything works well. And the directors cover the different departments, really, things like retail, things like the actual organisation, the running of the different palaces, the marketing, conservation side. So they all work with and report to the chief executive, and then the chief executive makes sure the trustees are happy with what we're doing. So, we have a lot of visitors to the 5 palaces in total. We have over, well, the last year, April 2010 round to March 2011, we had over 3.25 million visitors. But as you can see, most of them go to the Tower of London, and then Hampton Court has about 500,000, and Kensington about 250,000 visitors. Now this is visitors from all over the world and all sorts of different disabilities, different nationalities, everything. To help us keep focused, we have a cause, and our cause is the challenge to help everyone explore the story of how monarchs and people shaped society in some of the greatest palaces ever built. And the emphasis for us is very much on the word everyone. That's every nationality and every disability particularly, whether they've got an interest in English history or British history, whether they know much about British history, whether they have learned much about it at school. Which means that we're constantly looking at ways to improve access for all disabled people, and also diversity. So that's in the visitors we attract, of course, but also the staff we employ and the services we provide. In Britain, in 1995, we had a law come in that said that disabled access needed to be on an equal footing with access for non-disabled people. But although the law came in 1995, it did recognise that some things may take time to actually put into place. So services had to be equal by 1999, and buildings had to be equal by 2004. But there's all sorts of difficulties with that. But it's the aim that you shouldn't now have a building or a service that isn't thinking of disabled people.
Både bygge og tjenesten må være til rette. Både bygningene og tjenesten, altså innholdet, må være til rette.
So, to help us with making as much of the palaces as we can accessible for disabled people, we have 3 access panels, and they are made up of people who live near to one of the palaces, and they all have different disabilities, and they advise us. And here's pictures of the 3 different access panels. They have a range of disabilities, and one of the things we have found, of course, is that what is good for one person and one disability does not work for somebody else. And one of the key problems we've had is that, of course, deaf people need things to visual, but aren't particularly bothered about anything that is audio, that you can hear, whereas blind people don't need anything that's visual, but they do need to be able to hear things. So it's always a bit of a balancing act, and the access panels do help us find that middle ground. But what do we offer deaf people particularly? At each of our palaces we can offer British Sign Language interpretation, either on set days or on a pre-booked basis, or just turn up and the interpreter will be there, or it might be that you need to arrange a special day, but we can do that for all 5 palaces. Where we have audio tours, we also have the transcripts available that people can take and read as they're going around. Any film presentations that we have subtitles in English, and we also have induction loops for hearing aid listeners at all our till points and various places. We also have visitor information in British Sign Language on our website, and John did that for us, dressed in different costumes according to the different palaces. And the reason for that, of course, is that the visitor information at the 5 palaces is often very similar. The opening times are very often the same across all 5 palaces, so we wanted a way of showing people when they were on the website that the information they were looking at was about a particular palace and that they didn't get confused. So this is where John suggested dressing up in different costumes. We have this one, which is a medieval peasant, I think, dressed for the Tower of London, because the Tower of London is the oldest. We've then got a Tudor gentleman dressed for Hampton Court, so from someone from Henry VIII's court. Up here we have someone from the first part of the 17th century for the banqueting house. Over here, someone at the end of the 17th century for Kensington Palace, and then someone for the 18th century for Kew Palace. So they all look very slightly different, and the idea is that you see that costume, you know the information is about Kew Palace. And we did win an award for these, the Jodie Award, and it was as a result of that we've become partners in this project. But that's all we do. That's pretty much it, really. We're very good at the customer service side and a personalised visit, but it is with a person. We don't currently have self-guided videos that a deaf person could take and go around with by themselves on any day. We don't currently employ any deaf tour guides. We've tried asking people, but they get a bit worried about the amount of history they might have to learn, so we need to start small, and that's something we're hoping to do in the near future, do a few little things at a time. And we do get a lot of deaf people visiting and joining in. This is our interpreter interpreting at the Tower of London. You can see there's a very big group. These are some deaf people joining in with some dancing at Christmas a couple of years ago. So they join in very actively, but they don't really lead the visit. It's a lot of it is us saying, we can offer you this, what do you want? They're not necessarily being proactive. So it's very personalised, which is fine if deaf people come on their own or when the interpreter is there. If they come with a family, particularly if there's hearing and deaf mixed within the family, can be a little bit harder. So we're here to learn more. And these are the 4 of us who are here. John, Lynn, Vicky and myself. That's it.